Hey, welcome back to the channel. I had a request recently from a user called Electric Spot about NoesisGUI and how you can get set up and running with that. So I figured it's pretty straightforward. It's a great opportunity to make a video, and they have some really good documentation on how to do it. So I figured we'd just kind of walk through it together. I haven't rehearsed this or anything, so I feel like it's kind of show you naturally all the little stumbling points. I've only done this a couple of times. So there's probably a few hiccups we'll hit along the way, but they have, as I mentioned, really good documentation. So we should be able to get this through this together pretty easily. And yeah, let's begin. So first thing, jump over to their docs for how to get started, and I'll have a link to this page in the description. Um, but this definitely helped me get going, and it's super easy to do. So what we'll do is start by getting a new project made in Unity. I'm currently using, I guess it is showing 2021.1.0 F1, and I'm going to make a 2D project in Unity because my games are 2D based. You can get away with 3D or kind of do whatever you want to do, I guess, but for this video, we're going to make a 2D one. I'm just going to call it new project or new Unity project. I'm going to put it in my, oh, cool, we'll call it Noesis test. And I'm just going to put it in this location and create a 2D project. Last time I tried to make a project, it seemed to take quite a while from Unity, so I'll figure to kick this off, let it get going, and then kind of talk about some of the steps we're going to have to take to get Noesis set up and running. So first thing you're going to want to do is click this download link and download this NoesisGUI Unity package. They do explain with some great pictures and stuff like how you're going to import that. The times I've tried this, it's worked perfectly. There's never been hiccups at this stage, so you're going to want to download this. And once we have our project set up here, and as I mentioned, it's going to take, I think it took about 3 to 4 minutes last time I made one, which is kind of crappy, but we'll kind of go through that. I wanted to be able to show you exactly what I'm doing so that there's no magic steps that are missing that you have to guess at what to do. But anyway, once this is open, we're going to, like as a first step, basically go to this assets menu, import packages, and go to custom package menu, and then point it at the Unity package for NoesisGUI. So make sure you've started downloading this, pause the video, kind of get that going. I already have it downloaded from before, so I don't have to wait for that. Just got to wait for this Unity project to get created. But there's not too much more to do after that. So by adding this custom package, I'm going to leave the samples and stuff on by default when we walk through this. But if you're kind of doing this for your own project, it definitely doesn't make sense for you to, unless you're just kind of fooling around to start. If you have your game kind of up and running, you don't want to include the samples for Noesis directly into your project. That doesn't really make sense because you're not going to want to ship or deliver any type of game that has these samples in it. So just something to think about. You probably don't need to have these samples pulled down, but I do recommend as you're kind of learning and experimenting with what Noesis can do that definitely try out the samples. It's a great opportunity to see how things work, how they recommend structuring things, and we're going to kind of go over some of that once this is all set up and running. So um, we're about 2 minutes into hopefully what's about 4 minutes. So just to kind of touch on it, once you've got that that custom package imported, you should see this Noesis GUI menu. I think that's a good checkpoint that after, if you try to import it, if you don't see this or you get some type of error message or something else that comes up, you're going to want to start debugging something else before even continuing with this video. So just kind of use that as a checkpoint. But it does look like we have Unity open here, so that's great. Um, there we go, it's finished. So as it mentioned, we're going to go to the Assets menu, Import Package, and then Custom Package. Right here, it's sitting right at the top. So we're going to be using NoesisGUI 3.0.11, and we're just going to go ahead and open that. Get a little spinner. It's preparing the package now. Cool. So here's the import selection that we get to pick from. As I mentioned, we are going to pull in the samples when we do this. There's some editor, libraries, and the samples, right? So this is a point where if you're actually adding this to your game, you probably want to consider unchecking that. It's not going to hurt your install or anything if you decide that say it's an accident that you've checked this off and you've included the samples. You can always just delete the content. You don't need to have it. That's totally fine. And they also do have a link. Like basically their whole GitHub is set up so that you can get these samples if you mess up and you did want to see them. And I think the other thing too is I think the way that the Unity packages work is that you can basically re-import this, and it will just let you have the opportunity to overlay the samples folder as well. So you can't really mess up too much here if you've accidentally done this and you wanted it, or the other way, you've included it and you didn't want it. But anyway, we're going to include it for now. I'm going to press this import button. It's going to work its magic and add these files into our project down here. And hopefully this process doesn't take 4 minutes, because that'll make for a pretty boring video. But again, trying to make this as foolproof as possible. I want to show you like all the steps that are actually happening so that you're not guessing at some steps in between. You can pause and rewind this video and kind of do what you need to do. So it's importing the actual files now. We'll just wait for that to go through. And like I mentioned, based on their documentation, we should see a little pop-up window that says, hey, like, here's NoesisGUI, like it's a little welcome screen, and we're just going to close it off. But like I mentioned, that's a good checkpoint to make sure that things are working as we expect. If you don't see that, probably going to want to check on their forums and see what's going on, and maybe there's something about your current install that needs to be figured out before progressing. So with the samples, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of files to go through, so we'll just keep waiting on that. As that's going, just want to touch on the fact that this initial scene we've added has a main camera added to it. For this little walkthrough, we're going to be talking about getting Noesis to work with a camera. You can definitely, I haven't tried this yet, but you can set it up so that the GUI that you're creating in Noesis actually renders to a texture instead. And I think there's some really interesting things you can do, especially with 3D games, where you can essentially make some surfaces like in 3D render a WPF GUI, and I think that's super cool. For the games I'm creating, I basically only make 2D games because anything that's three-dimensional, I'm already pretty terrible when it comes to art, so 3D is just a stretch of that my inability to have art. So I stick to 2D. I'm going to be using this camera to set up the GUI, but as I mentioned, they have documentation and stuff like that on how you can set up your user interface to actually render to a texture if you prefer that method. Iteration 2, okay, come on. Just when we thought it was done. So here's some of the samples coming in. Okay, so while that's wrapping up, let's quickly double check the rest of some of this documentation here. We said we're going to get this menu, so hopefully we see that. We did select to have the examples, so we should see these samples included here. And yeah, as I mentioned, it says right here, a lot more examples can be found at our GitHub repository, so definitely make sure you check that out. Hopefully you don't find yourself reinventing the wheel for any of this, because I think they have some really awesome examples for you to walk through. And it looks like we're still going. We're getting there. And then there are some settings. We're probably just going to leave this to the default settings for now. I think You can figure out what you want to do if you need to adjust anything. I think another key thing that I don't believe they necessarily address in this documentation here, at least in order. So I'll call it out right now that there is a license, and you can use a trial license. So we're going to do that. Probably if it complains to us, but I've seen it where it basically starts up, it renders, and then a few seconds in, it just kind of kills the rendering of your UI and says, "Hey, you need a license." But the trial licenses and stuff are free. I think that they have pricing and stuff that's I think for if you're not profiting off your game, I think it's free essentially. And but anyway, you can check that out on their website. So we'll pull this back up. Here's the welcome menu that we said we were supposed to see, and we see it, so that's awesome. So now we can get started. So I mentioned I'm going to leave the settings at their default, but what we're able to do is basically add the Noesis functionality to our main camera by adding a component that is called a Noesis view, and that's total coincidence that I have NOE type there for a Noesis view. That must be from my actual game that I am working on. So when we add this Noesis view component to this camera, we need to give it some XAML that we're going to be showing as our user interface. Some other key things, and I'll probably make a separate video to address this directly, but I've seen that I basically need to have this box checked for enable. I can't remember what PPAA stands for. It's some type of anti-aliasing, but what I've noticed is that when it comes to drawing very small details, like say 1 pixel width lines on some of your UI elements, if you don't have this checked off, then it seems to do some odd things, like it anti-aliases your lines and ends up causing some of the lines to basically go invisible. So I found that some of the details to show up properly do require this box being checked, but I'm pretty sure if you search for Noesis and PPAA, you'll find some information on exactly what this means. So definitely recommend you get that done. And we'll save this so we have a sample scene with a camera and a Noesis view attached to it. But like I mentioned, we're going to need to get some XAML created in here. So that's kind of the next step we're going to look at. I think if we just want to see a super quick way that we can get that working, we can probably just grab a sample and just drag and drop some stuff in there. So you'll notice as I kind of went into the samples folder, then inventory, we have some assets and stuff in here. And right before our eyes, we saw that main window kind of switched over and became like a different icon. I'm not exactly sure how it's operating under the hood here, but Noesis itself will do some work to basically transform your XAML files into an asset that can be used in Unity. So I think it should be as simple. This is from a sample that's an inventory for like what looks like a role-playing game. So we should be able to do that and drag this right over. And I believe as soon as we press play, we should actually see like an inventory window kind of animate on. It's super fancy. Like, how easy was that, right? Obviously, all the work is involved in actually creating this user interface, but to get this set up was camera, which came on the scene, add a Noesis view to the camera, and literally just drag and drop this right onto this XAML property in the editor. And, you know, you kind of watch this as I ran it. I didn't do anything fancy here. But anyway, obviously all of the work is kind of put into creating this XAML with animations, and they have, you know, like a sprite atlas to pull all this stuff from. So they've done work outside of this, and I think that's the benefit of using something like NoesisGUI, in my opinion at least, is that I'm a lot more comfortable writing backend code. I'm a lot more comfortable at using WPF to make user interfaces, even though I'm not great at it. for me, it's like light years ahead of trying to create a user interface directly in Unity, and I would much rather spend my time doing that because I already have the skills there. So as with this example, all the other effort to make this happen was done outside of Unity, right? And then you kind of put that all together and in a XAML file, and uh, and Noesis will make this asset for you basically automatically. There's some interesting behavior, like I'm not sure when it actually decides that when you change your XAML that it will like re-import the asset. I do know they have some hot reloading type of behavior. Um, I believe while your game is running, you can actually do it, but I haven't really dabbled too much with that. But anyway, they do reload this asset based on your XAML. So you spend all of your UI design time outside of Unity, and that kind of process happens automatically for you. So that's super powerful in my opinion. I probably just said the same thing 4 different ways, so apologies for repeating that. But um, super easy way to get this example up and running. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that. And let's spend a little bit of time basically walking through the next few steps in their guide, as well as some of the setup of the projects and stuff. I think I was kind of contemplating how we could set it up through Blend, but it's probably a better opportunity to look at their samples directly and kind of just walk through that. So I'm going to flip back to their instructions here. I talked about this configuration, how I wasn't necessarily going to bother with tweaking anything there. Blend is the next step, which is probably worth talking about. So Blend is it's essentially Visual Studio that has a bit more focus on uh, UI editing for WPF and some of the tools built in for animations and things like that. I'm absolutely terrible, like I've mentioned, at creating GUIs, so the animations and stuff I'm not great at, but there's a lot of tools in Blend to help you animate things. And you get your visual editor for WPF so you can see the XAML rendered as well as the actual XAML code. Um, so let's go ahead and kind of look at that. So it's just to kind of read it. An extension for Visual Studio is provided to create Blend projects that are compatible with both WPF and Unity. And this is key. So if you're used to using Unity and C#, you'll know that the solution and project file is essentially automatically generated by Unity. And that's kind of weird. I think a lot of people that are used to managing solutions and projects know that there's a lot of effort that can go into maintaining the structure and that kind of thing that you want. So having something like Unity just dynamically create those things is, to me, totally bizarre. But in order to get Blend to work, they have essentially a tool from Noesis that will kind of let you get up and running to have Blend set up as well. So they do recommend, I've already done this on my machine, so I'll kind of show you how it works, but they do recommend that you get basically this extension so that you can get project templates for Blend and Noesis to kind of work together with Unity. So I just read hot reloading. So if the flag hot reloading is enabled in NoesisGUI settings panel, changes performed will also appear immediately while in play mode. So that's super cool. And project template. So let's go ahead and get that in Visual Studio, right? So I think I can do it. Blend for Visual Studio. So let's do that. So I have 2019 here. As I mentioned, I already have it, so not a good example. I'm just going to open up my solution here, and I think this got corrupt from something earlier. But let's kind of check out the extension. So it's saying go to extensions, manage extensions, and then in the extension manager, expand online node and search for Noesis. So I already have it, as I mentioned, right? But let's go ahead and search it. Oh, that's weird. It says that I don't have it included, but I've absolutely done this before. So anyway, you would go ahead and press download. It says you're going to have to restart Visual Studio. And then that way, what you're able to do is go File, New, and then pick a project template just like this, right? So to create an application from the project template, you pick NoesisGUI here, and then it will basically set up a blend solution for you in your Unity folder. Okay, so let's talk about a couple other things. Their documentation's in a really good order here to kind of explain some of the things you're going to see. This part I don't really like about Noesis, but I kind of have this mentality that if you're going to have what I call like ugly code or garbage code or something like that, that it's kind of confined to one spot. So I feel like they have a good balance of this where I hate personally having like if defines and conditional compilation. I just can't stand it. I find that it makes things super complicated really fast, but I think they have a good balance of it. And essentially, this is just so that you can use Blend and Noesis in Unity kind of at the same time and have all your stuff work together. So this is a great example here where you're going to want this, and I think they do it automatically in their template for you, so you have an example of it. But you kind of need to say that your using statement for Noesis essentially replaces this. And if you try to have both namespaces in at the exact same time, either Blend won't work because it won't recognize Noesis, or Unity won't work because it doesn't recognize these other pieces. So you do need to have this conditional compilation. You don't need it in all your files, but you will need it in your XAML files. So actually, let's go back. Sorry, I'm jumping around here. We're going to look at their solution. So show in Explorer. I'm just going back to their inventory project. Right, so sample, inventory, and let's get this organized by type. So they have, maybe that's not a good way to do it. Oh, I thought they would have a blend folder in here, and I guess they don't. That's okay. We'll use our own then. So I'm going to go to here, open up this folder, and actually let's walk through. Oh, they're up here. My apologies. They put I figured they had blend projects, I just didn't know where they were. So they actually have them in the root of the project here. And then a blend folder. And then inventory. Okay, so they just organize it slightly different than I did in my own project, but theirs probably makes more sense to do it. So they have samples, blend. This would have been created using that workflow that they talked about with the project template that we just talked about from the extensions that you're going to want to install. Now let's just kind of highlight some of the things they have going on. So we're only talking about the one sample we're interested in, which is this inventory blend one. And let's talk about, so just ignore the other samples that are included. Because if you kind of compare this to a game that you would have, you're not going to have all these other projects in here. You would probably just have one for your own user interface that you're working with. But they have a blend specific folder, and that's kind of to give you an entry point into a WPF application. So let's go ahead and we're going to just launch this one. So you notice I set inventory blend as the startup project, and I'm going to press start here. And if you remember what we had in Unity, we had just by dragging that XAML file onto the Noesis view XAML property, basically right away we had a workable user interface. So if I press play here, this is going to create a window for us and drop in that same control. So this is just an entry point into a WPF application with the same controls, which again, my opinion on this is it's super powerful, so that you can actually work in your UI, kind of get things going how you like, and not even have to worry about working in Unity. I think that's just, incredibly valuable. So let's go ahead. I'm going to close this. I just wanted to show it running, but you have in this project, you do have an entry point here, your app XAML. I'm going to open that up. startup URI is pointing to main window inside of assets, NoesisGUI, samples, inventory, and main window, right? So this blend folder is blend specific. It's just to give you an entry point into a WPF application, but this folder is kind of what you would see in Unity. And I think maybe a good example of showing that is that if we kind of mirror the folder structure, I'm just going to try to put these side by side to compare. We opened samples blend solution, which is what's loaded here in blend. And if we're looking at the projects, inventory blend is sort of at the same level as the solution, right? And then if we want to look at the actual files that are included in Unity, they're in our assets folder, right? Then they're in NoesisGUI, they're in samples, they're in inventory. And hopefully you're kind of seeing as I click through that this structure up here, right, is the same structure that you have inside of Unity, right? It is literally this folder. So that's just a key call out. And what else do I want to highlight here? So let's actually look at the content of one of these windows because we were talking about conditional compilation. So what I'm going to do is open the code behind, and there we go. We can see at the very top we do have that conditional compilation. We are not in Unity. We're in Blend right now, right? So this part's all disabled. We do get this. And then there's a couple other things going on here. They have some hookups for some callbacks here. So this part is kind of like specific to their their sample. You don't have to do this. This is what they do. Same thing with this code here. That's really just to onload, assign a view model to their data context. That's all it's doing. So you don't need that, and you don't need this. You can kind of decide how you want to handle setting up your view models. But there are a couple important things to acknowledge here. And this is, like, ideally if you're using something like MVVM or some other UI design architectures, you're not putting basically any code in your code behind, except for, in this particular case, some of what we see going on here. So let's talk about this. Right now, because we're in Blend, initialize component is actually hooked into the framework such that it will set up everything in your XAML, right? So your XAML, how that's all defined, that's going to get pulled in and basically converted into objects and stuff like that when we call initialize component here. So this is responsible, as it would normally be in a WPF application, for doing that work. The conditional part here is that when we're in Noesis, we don't have that same part of the framework that's going to be converting our XAML into objects, but instead they have their own sort of system for doing that. We talked about having Noesis automatically convert the XAML into an asset for us, and that's actually what this is going to do for us here. So instead of like when we're in Unity, because we can't rely on the built-in stuff, Noesis has their own implementation. So this doesn't exist, but we kind of define it while in Noesis, right? That's what this is for. And then call into their framework to do this work for us. Personal opinion of mine is that I actually wrapped this even more to have some automatic namespace resolution so that if I'm moving stuff around, I don't accidentally have things in the wrong folder. So just wanted to call that out, is that you can make some helper methods to make this a little bit more clean for you. If you're ever worried about, say, you're moving this control main window into something else that's not inventory, like, right? So you've moved that into a cool UI stuff folder. As long as you're keeping, my opinion, as long as you're keeping your namespaces and folders in sync, you can do some cool stuff with basically making this a little bit more automatic to resolve. anyway, just a thought. If you're trying to reduce some of the differences between Noesis and Unity, sorry, Noesis and Blend. So that's probably mostly it for this particular file. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's really worth mentioning, and the answer is probably if we look at the solution for what we just made from the Unity side, right? So we have Blend opened. This is going to be the Blend perspective, but let's open Visual Studio um, from Unity, basically, right? So this Noesis test solution is the one that Unity created for our project. So let's go ahead and open that. And what I'd like to talk about is the files that you see included in the solution, um, depending on if you're in Blend or if you're in Unity. Okay, so that's loaded up. Hopefully I can do this one on each side here. Okay, so ignore the C# editor one for now. We're just dealing with this top one. You'll notice already, right? So we don't have a blend folder in here because that's blend specific. We do have assets, right? And this is on the right. This is created for us. This whole structure is created for us by Unity. And you'll notice assets, NoesisGUI, samples, inventory. Same thing, assets, NoesisGUI. We have some extra stuff, right? So that's the first subtle difference. So if I press show all files, suddenly there's a lot more stuff, right? In Blend, there's a lot more stuff that's hidden from us. First of all, because this setup for their samples was just this one project for this specific set of stuff, they didn't include all the other sample project code in this one. So that makes sense. That's an obvious one. Second thing you'll notice is they don't include asset or asset metadata. The reason why is that this is Unity specific. It offers no value here. Okay, so don't worry about trying to include those. They're not going to be of any value inside Blend for us. And let's kind of dive down a little deeper. So plugins, we were talking about the inventory one. So not plugins, we want samples, inventory. And then you'll notice that this folder is a lot different, right? Inventory. Why? Like where is everything else that we were interested in? So I'm going to do the same thing, and we'll notice that there are things that are included in Unity and not in Blend. Okay, and the things that Unity doesn't care about are the actual XAML files. Unity does not care about the XAML files. That is a Blend specific thing, and as I've mentioned a few times, Noesis, while in Unity, will convert those XAML files into assets. So that's why on the right here, like actually this is probably a poor example, but I'll elaborate a little bit more. The right side does not care about XAML files, and assets aren't used in code, but they are used in Unity, right? So that's a Unity specific thing, and as I mentioned, the Unity side does not care about XAML, so they don't get included. And the left side here is focused on XAML and not assets, so that's why you see these included. It might sound complicated, but you got to keep in mind that on the right side, this is controlled by Unity. By default, it's not going to be including XAML for you. So you don't have to worry about remembering to include that or not. It will just regenerate your project and kind of keep it out of being included in here. If you try to include it, depending on what your stuff looks like, number one, first of all, Unity will blow away this inclusion when it regenerates your project. But number two, if you do it temporarily, I've seen sometimes where it just has compilation errors because it can't resolve certain things. But it doesn't need to be included, and it won't be, as I've mentioned. So let's go ahead and actually open up the code behind for it. And this is the part that is important. And you'll notice I have the same thing open on both sides here, and because on the right side we are in Unity, we do... Oh, I didn't save this, so that was confusing. There you go. Now they're mirrored. You'll notice that because on the right side we are in Unity, we get Noesis defined, right, using Noesis, and then this block of code does get turned on. On the left side, it's the complete inverse, right? So if I F12 on this one on the left, on initialize component, to actually go to the implementation, you'll see that this is like some built-in stuff that's actually going to kind of get our XAML all built for us and converted into objects. If I F12 on this one on the right side, it just goes to this line. So if I don't have this, essentially, Noesis does not have a way to go pull the information from the assets for us. So hopefully that kind of helps explain that piece. And maybe with that said, let's do a quick jump back to the setup documentation and see if there's anything else that's probably worth mentioning. So they talk about the XAML assets here. It does say if you don't need to edit the XAML, you can remove it from your project because it's not necessary for the runtime. Right? Although this is not strictly needed because XAML files are not included in the final build produced by Unity. Right? Because as I mentioned, they're converting those into assets. Nothing's actually happening with the XAML files after the assets get created, so they're not going to get output. Let's see. They talk about resource dictionaries and things like that, so how those get managed. Textures. So this is actually an important part that we're going to want to cover pretty quickly. This took me forever to find, and I'll just kind of touch on it briefly because we're not messing around with creating a whole user interface from scratch right now. But if you're dealing with transparency, so if you have PNGs as an example, this is something you're going to want to pay attention to. I'll probably make a short snippet video of this exact same thing for people to easily find, but this part's important. If you have a JPEG, no transparencies, you want to use it as a background, you don't really have to mess around with this, but you will want to care about the alpha settings with PNGs. And I didn't realize this, but you'll notice this icon right here, it's a little tag, right? You're going to want to click that and then make sure that your PNGs that you're going to be using in your UI do have this Noesis label on them. If you don't do that, your picture will still show up, but what I've noticed is that it will have all sorts of different like odd artifacts in the background of it where there's supposed to be transparencies. It's highly unusable that way because it looks like a completely different picture. But if you're starting to experience that, I definitely they have it in their documentation. It's easy to skip over. And it's even harder to notice if you're not familiar with some of these things in Unity. There is this little label thing here, and you're going to want to set that to be Noesis. I personally have not dealt with any audio or fonts yet, so I'll skip over that. They do have some input pieces here as well, and how to configure that. And then they kind of talk here about setting it up with a camera, which is what we showed, right? So we dragged and dropped the inventory main window right onto this Noesis view that we added. If you've made it this far and you're kind of curious about how you can do it with a texture instead of a camera, again, right in their documentation. I personally have not messed around with this, but I think they have a really cool example here where they literally have a WPF UI rendered to a texture that's in a 3D space. So that's super cool. And then a couple extra points on hit testing. I'm not going to dive into that. And then how you can get that to work on these other players. All right, so I think that's super high level how you can set up NoesisGUI with Blend and Visual Studio and Unity to all kind of just work together. Just to reiterate quickly, I think there's a lot of power in being able to make WPF UIs, have them in Unity. And personally, this is something I'm going to definitely take advantage of. Trying to learn how to make user interfaces in Unity is challenging for me, and I really enjoy being able to leverage XAML, the resources, the styling, the animations, all of that from WPF in my game. So with that said, I think that's it. I will have a link to both this tutorial, and probably I'll put in their GitHub link as well so you can see the samples. And I do recommend you check out the samples because they explain everything that you probably are trying to do with some concrete examples, and they're all really flashy and cool to use. So hopefully this helps. And if you have any other questions, please ask in the comments. I'll see if I've dealt with it, or I can answer quickly, or maybe make a whole video on it. And hopefully this is helpful. Thank you.